Today we're talking about the skull and smoke tattoo design. Welcome back. You may have seen this design on the Using Freehand video, but in this video we get to go through the entire process of finishing this one design. And I love drawing skulls, so let's get started and make sure to hit the subscribe button. The brief for this tattoo is fairly simple. Our client would like a large skull on her shoulder and for that skull to be wearing a hood. Here, I'm just getting things started with the thumbnail on the computer, and this just gives us the most basic idea of how big we want our skull to be. I try to thumbnail every design at least a few times. At this stage, it's better to go for quantity and not quality, so it's okay if your skull looks a bit like a potato. We decided that the hood would be all threadbare and tattered, and that the fabric in front of the skull would be in negative space. Our client has given us some references to help communicate a few ideas they had for their design, so we'll keep these here for inspiration. Another big part of this design is anatomical references. To get references for a skull, I usually search for photographs of replica skulls. These are the kind that they sell for doctors' offices. These are anatomically correct, and you can usually find a lot more photos of replica skulls as opposed to real ones. Since our client has expressed an interest in realistic light and shadow, and also smoke coming from the mouth and surrounding the skull, I decided to generate a bunch of images for reference. And here we find ourselves in a familiar situation with generated images. They have pretty average composition and details, but they have really interesting ideas for light and shadow. For example, I always forget to put in these thin, bright highlights in areas that I have dark shadow. And since these images have several different ways of doing the smoke, I can look through and see how each style is working. And there's lots of options for how to approach the texture of the bone as well. Some of these images are really detailed with their shading, even in open areas that I would normally leave blank. So I'm reminded that as long as I'm choosing interesting textures for the shading, I should be putting a lot more shading into my designs. I'm drawing this skull in freehand, which means I have a very specific order that I'll be working. These guidelines are so light that you won't be able to see them in the final artwork, so you can use as many as you like. I have to first lay out the structure of the entire piece as light as possible. It's critical that you get this step right, but at the same time, you want to stay loose and not take this too seriously. Just keep drawing extremely light and know that all of these lines will disappear in the final drawing, so you can be as sketchy as you like. There's probably a life lesson in there somewhere. To do the first outline, I'm using my mechanical pencil. Now, I normally use a hard pencil with a dull tip for this job, but I used my mechanical pencil for those first guidelines and it was feeling good, so I just kept using it. In the end, the texture for the skull ends up being very detailed, and I think that is partially because I ended up using a lot of mechanical pencil in the drawing. And here, I'm starting to add some darkness and weight to start defining those shapes. I call this my second light pass, and you can see me start to put in some of the light cross-hatching to get a feel for some of the depth. I'm trying to not get too caught up in the final shapes or details. I just want to get the most basic shapes and shading down. The secret when building up your drawing is to just draw extremely light. Drawing light is easily the most important skill when freehanding. I think most people intuitively know how to draw heavy, but you have to really train to be able to draw light. Now I'm going through with my third light pass with a hard and dull pencil, and in this stage we start to block everything in. I'm using cross-hatching to get these big fields of shading done, and I keep telling myself to not go too heavy here. What you want is to end up with a sort of completed version of the artwork even though all the shading is really light. Then it becomes a lot easier to see how the composition is working out and to make changes as well. And all this shading erases really easily. Once we start to go darker, making changes will get a lot harder, so it's better to make changes while we're still here. And once I get everything blocked in, I use my eraser to start shaping some of the negative space in the hood, and then using my pencil to add some definition back into those shapes. Now that I'm back at the top of the image, there's a risk that I start to smudge the graphite, but since I used a hard lead pencil for everything so far, there is minimal smudging. Once we move into our darker pencil though, we have to switch things up and start to work from top to bottom and complete one area at a time. And after we get the negative space areas sorted out, it's time to start doing our darkest shading with our softest pencil. We know that we want a dark shadow underneath the negative space elements at the top of the image, so I can confidently start in with this heavy black shading. And the same goes for the dark eye sockets. And from there, I switch back and forth with my 4 tools. I always use the same 4 things in my drawings, that being a hard pencil, a soft pencil, a mechanical pencil, and an eraser. And since we're completing an entire area before moving on, we have to do a lot of switching. And you might notice that my first light drawing is sort of disappearing, or blending into all this new shading. And that tells me I can be really sketchy when I'm first starting a drawing. You really want to feel confidence when you're adding darkness to these areas. And the key to that is being able to first draw really light and then completing a really light version of the artwork before going dark. It's just a lot easier to make choices once your structure is solid. You might notice that the darkest and lightest areas can be pretty straightforward, but there's a lot of play when you get into the middle values. I tend to block in and crosshatch large sections of the middle values in fields, and looking at areas of shading as fields is how I tattoo middle values as well. When looking at a field, I'm shading over top of shading that I've already done, and I'm not thinking about the small details that I'm going over. I'm sort of tinting an area to be darker as a whole. I can then redefine the details in these areas with the mechanical pencil and eraser. Since there's smoke around the skull, I carve out these small sections of negative space with my eraser, and I'm also cleaning up some of the larger areas of negative space as well. There's a lot more mechanical pencil in this drawing than I normally do, and that gives the image a really sharp and focused look. And I love drawing skulls, and I've often said that if there was a job to tattoo only skulls, I'd be glad to take it. And if you're gonna end up tattooing a bunch of skulls, it's really important to first study what's going on with them. I can guarantee that the most interesting shapes that you can draw on a skull are found in real life, so it really becomes a game of research. My favorite artists when growing up were Freddie Negretti and Paul Booth. These two artists really summed up everything that I was interested in, and they both do phenomenal black and gray shading. And looking back, I now realize that all of that amazing work that they were doing in the early days was done without the internet and without computers. And that just shows an unbelievable talent and dedication to the art, and I find this to be really inspiring to this day. And after a few finishing touches, the artwork is complete. But I'm going to want to scan this into the computer to make a few small changes, because I can notice there's a few problems in the artwork. Here, I'm flipping the image horizontally. This is sort of like looking at the image in a mirror, and you'll immediately notice problems with the composition and with the proportions. But in Procreate and Photoshop, there is a Liquify tool, and that allows you to reshape the drawing without losing any detail. And here's a quick before and after. I then flip the image back the other way, and after making a new layer, I can start to draw a bunch of guidelines to make sure things look roughly symmetrical. And I notice that I need to shift over the lower jaw a little, and to do that, I quickly use the transform tools. Things don't have to be perfectly symmetrical, but I just want the entire composition to feel roughly balanced. And we can see how this might look as a tattoo by adding the drawing to our blank. At this point, I usually make a copy of the artwork and then alter the edges so it looks like the art is wrapping around the body, sort of like a tattoo. This just makes things a bit easier to visualize, and I noticed that I could make a few changes to a few areas around the jaw of the skull. And with that done, we have the drawing complete and a big presentation to show our client during their next consultation. And that is the first draft of the Skull and Smoke tattoo design. Hey, if you got anything out of this, then help us out by hitting the like button and subscribe to our channel. We come out with new videos often, and make sure to hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And if you're serious about creating the best art possible for your tattoos, then go to tattoodesignschool.com and check out the masterclass. This is everything I wish I knew when I was first starting out, and it will push you to create artwork you didn't think was possible. This is the perfect investment in your tattoo career, so check out the masterclass at tattoodesignschool.com. But most importantly, share this video with the person you know who's interested in artwork and tattoos. And we'll see you in the next one.